Controlling the distance. Bruce Lee once said that the fighter who controls the distance during combat will nearly always be the victor. So what is controlling the distance? What does it mean? Well, here we have fighter A and fighter B, and it's the space between the two fighters. Now, if you can take control of that space, now for me, the best way of doing that is, number one, you must have a great jab. You also need the skill of being able to come on and off the line, great footwork and punch accuracy. It's important because if you make that space yours, if you're skilled enough, you can fight at your tempo, which means you relax more and you choose when to attack or move away. Therefore, your opponent has to continually try to get into range and try and find his tempo and rhythm, but you in essence are leading the dance. When a fighter is struggling to get into range, to find his tempo and rhythm, it can often force fighters into mistakes and therefore get them out of position, which is great for you because then you have even more control of the fight. Floyd would do it with great lateral movement, i.e. side to side movement, and fight when he wanted to. Andre Ward would use a probing jab, putting his lead hand out and fencing with it, so he always had a measure to get into punching range or to get out to safety. Today, two fighters who control the distance really well are Dimitri Bivol and Shakur Stevenson. Shakur does it by just slipping back out of range, just taking a little step backwards and slipping out of range and then exploding back into range really quickly. Another trick Shakur has started to employ is flicking out that lead hand and a nice probing jab. Now, a lot of people who say, oh, they're just pity-patty jabs and they're not doing anything. But no, you're doing two things here. What you're doing is you're occupying your opponent. Yeah, it's continually in his face and he doesn't know whether it's going to be a hard jab or it's just going to be a little flick. And the other thing is you're continually getting a measure between you and your opponent. Shakur will often use that lead hand of his, the right hand, when facing an orthodox opponent whose lead hand will be their left hand, to occupy that lead hand by continually touching it, continually probing with it. And what that does is it's a kind of early warning system. You know when somebody tries to get around that, you know they're going to attack you. And it can be terribly frustrating. For a great example of this, go and look at Rigondeaux versus Nonito Donaire, and you'll see Rigo continually fencing with Nonito's lead hand and see just how frustrated Donaire becomes with that tactic. So if you are faced with someone who is controlling the distance, who's great at controlling the distance, how do you fight them? Now for me, it would have been very interesting to see Shakur Stevenson and Josh Warrington, as Warrington is excellent at weaving in and closing the distance very quickly. Warrington has very quick feet, and it is those quick explosive movements and getting into range really quickly that stops someone controlling the distance. If you go and take a look at the first Kovalev versus Ward fight, and you'll see that when Andre Ward has problems in getting into range and getting past Sergei's ramrod jab, he shifts forward, and that means he steps forward with his left, he steps forward with his right foot, and he weaves in really quickly and doesn't give Sergei a target to hit by stepping forward left, by stepping forward right. But that's a very risky tactic and only for the elite. Gennady Golovkin is another fighter who loves to control the distance, loves to control the tempo of the fight, and he'll do that by that wonderful jab that he's got. But if you go and look at his fight against Sergei Devyachenko, I hope I pronounced that right, you'll see that Devyachenko takes away that jab by slipping, ducking, stepping back out of range. He doesn't give Golovkin a target, a constant target, and therefore he started to have some real success in that fight and was able to weave in and do some serious damage inside, and I do believe he really hurt Golovkin with a body shot. Take a look at Lomachenko versus Luke Campbell. Now, from the very beginning of that fight, Luke Campbell comes out and he takes up position in the centre of the ring and he starts throwing out his jab. and he's trying to control the distance. But Lomachenko, one of the most skilled fighters on the planet, is having none of it. He's continually feinting with his feet, feinting with his head, that wonderful broken rhythm. You don't know when he's going to come in, when he's going to step back, when he's going to go from side to side. And slowly, little by little, Lomachenko controls the fight, because he's coming in, especially as the fight goes on, coming in when he wants to and controlling the rhythm and the tempo of the fight. So you're in a fight, you started off controlling the distance, and now your opponent is managing to get inside your jab, they're figuring out your movements, they are starting to take control of the fight. What do? Well, once they're inside that jab, you have to tie them up. And I know a lot of boxing fans will say, oh, you know, clinching and hugging and all of that stuff. No, if you're going to be a sensible fighter, if you're going to be an elite fighter, you have to learn to tie up. If somebody's coming in and they're getting past your jab and they're coming in close, you have to learn to tie up. If your game is wanting to establish your jab, control the distance, and they're getting past all that, then you have to learn to tie them up. You have to control them. When Andre Ward first turned professional, Virgil Hunter had him in the gym, and they trained for hours and hours and hours on developing an inside game. True inside fighting, that means tying up, working in the clinch, all of that stuff. And Andre Ward didn't want to know. He didn't like it. He found it really, really difficult. But Virgil Hunter impressed on him that if he's going to be a true professional and he's going to get to the top of the sport, this is what he's going to need. He needs to be able to fight at all ranges. Long range, mid range, and in close. So if you're a fighter who feels that controlling the distance would come naturally to you, you've got a great jab, by all means work on it. Work on that jab, work on your lateral movement, work on, the ability to step out of range and back into range really quickly, but do not neglect the other areas of your game. Do not neglect the ability to fight at mid-range, and like I say, the ability to tie up, to control, to inside fight. Just one more example before I go. Take a look at Callum Smith versus John Ryder. Callum's beautiful stylist, fires out that jab, got a great right hand, can do all those hooks and stuff. Beautiful, fighting at one distance. But when John Ryder closed that distance and came inside and started to fight at mid-range and inside fighting, Callum had no answer to it. And that's what I mean. Do not neglect all the areas of your game. Become a complete fighter. Learn to control the distance, learn to fight at mid-range, and when you need to, learn how to tie up and control. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next video.